The wind on the northern plains did not simply blow, it screamed. It was a feral, living thing made of ice and shattered glass, a beast that sought to scour the world clean of warmth and weakness. It tore at the thick winter pelts of the king's personal guard, horses snorting clouds of steam into the blinding white. At the head of this grim procession, astride a midnight black warhorse that seemed carved from shadow itself, rode Alpha King Kalen. His face was a mask of granite, his eyes the color of molten gold, scanning the featureless void. He had not spoken for hours. A deep, gnawing restlessness had settled in his bones months ago, an emptiness in the throne room of his own heart. It was this feeling, not duty, that had driven him from the warmth of his citadel, Frostfall, to ride the most remote border of his kingdom in the worst storm in a century. His beta, a mountain of a wolf named Torin, urged his horse forward, leaning close to be heard over the gale. "Your Majesty, the mountain pass to the citadel seals within the hour. If we do not press on, we will be trapped in this valley." Kalen did not turn. He raised a fur-gloved hand, and the entire column froze. The command was absolute. The wind shrieked, mocking them. But Kalen's senses, honed over a century of rule and warfare, were casting a net far finer than any ordinary wolf's. Beneath the stench of pine and the ozone crackle of the storm, he caught a thread, a scent so faint it was more memory than smell. Milk, fresh grass, and beneath it, the cold metallic whisper of blood. It was a scent of life, pure and desperate, being snuffed out. His heart gave a single painful thud against his ribs. He dismounted, his boots sinking into snow that swallowed him to the knee. "Your Majesty," Torin protested, but his voice was already lost. Kalen was moving, a dark giant against the white, his powerful frame cutting through the blizzard like a ship through a frozen sea. The scent led him off the ghost of a trail, past a skeletal stand of ice-laden firs. His golden eyes, sharp as eagles, scanned the drifts. There, a mound. It was wrong. Too smooth, too rounded, like a grave hastily dug by the storm itself. A low, warning growl built in his chest, a sound that made the very air tremble. He fell to his knees, ignoring the bite of the cold, and began to dig. He used his hands, his alpha strength shattering the ice pack like crystal. The world narrowed to the frantic motion of his arms, the burning in his lungs, and that dying, beautiful scent growing stronger. First, he saw hair, a shock of pure, blinding white, like the heart of a snowflake. Then a shoulder, so pale it seemed carved from moonlight itself. He dug faster, a strange desperation clawing at his throat. He unearthed her. She was an omega. The gentle, submissive signature of her spirit was unmistakable, a soft bell in the howling dark. But she was unlike any omega he had ever seen, an albino. Her skin was the color of winter cream, her eyebrows and lashes a stark silver white. She was devastatingly fragile, and she was freezing to death. She was curled in a tight ball, her emaciated body a final, futile shield around a bundle of ragged furs clutched to her chest. Torin and the guards arrived, their torchlight painting the scene in flickering hellish shades. "By the great wolf above!" Torin breathed, his face etched with horror. Kalen acted with a gentleness that felt alien to his warrior's hands. He brushed the snow from her face. Her lips were a terrifying violet blue. Unconscious, but a faint, pained whimper escaped her, the sound of a soul clinging to a cliff's edge. Her arms were locked around the bundle with the strength of finality. "Torin! The medical shelter! Now!" Kalen's roar was a thunderclap of pure command that momentarily silenced the storm. He slipped his arms beneath her, lifting her as if she were made of spun glass. She weighed nothing. As he lifted her, the bundle in her arms shifted. A sound emerged, not a cry, but a tiny, desperate squeak, weaker than a mouse's sigh. Kalen froze. He looked down. Peeking from the frozen rags was a tiny, perfect wolf pup's face, eyes sealed shut. And then he saw another, and another. His blood, already cold, turned to ice, then erupted into fire. "Move!" Kalen bellowed, and his men exploded into action, driven by the fury in his king's voice. The Alpha King stood in the maelstrom, holding a dying woman and her secrets, and the emptiness inside him was suddenly terribly filled with a roaring, protective rage. Inside the hastily erected canvas shelter, thick with the smell of oiled hide and fear, the world shrank to a circle of lamplight. Kalen laid the unconscious Omega on his own royal pelt, a treasure of ice bear fur meant for a throne, not a frozen field. "Warm water. Healer Anya, find her now." His voice was a blade. The pack's chief medic, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind named Anya, pushed through the flap, snow dusting her shoulders. She took one look and her professional calm tightened into grim focus. "Your Highness, I need space." Kalen took a single grudging step back, becoming a brooding shadow against a canvas wall. He watched, every muscle taut, as Anya used shears to carefully cut away the frozen, sodden rags that bound the Omega to her burden. The medic's hands stilled. A soft gasp escaped her. The Omega's thin arms were not just wrapped around a bundle, they were a cage, a sanctuary around 6 tiny shivering forms. 6 pups. They were a tangled heap of miniature limbs, some pink and barely furred, others showing the faint ghost of a coat. All were shuddering, their breaths so shallow they barely misted the air. Kalen's gaze, like a general surveying a battlefield, swept over them. One pup was as white as its mother, a little ghost. 2 were a murky gray, like storm clouds. 1 had a dusting of dark silver. 2 were the profound, velvety black of a starless midnight. 6, Torn murmured from the entrance, his voice thick with awe and dread. No Omega, not even with a full pack. 6 in this? Kalen's eyes returned to the Omega's face. She was so young. Lines of exhaustion were carved into her alabaster skin, but they spoke of a depth of suffering that had nothing to do with years. A fury, hotter and purer than any he had felt in battle, ignited in his chest. This was not misfortune. This was a sentence, a deliberate, cruel eradication. "Anya," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. "Save them. Every single one." "I will fight for them, Alpha," Anya vowed, already in motion. She began rubbing the pups' tiny chests with cloths warmed by the brazier, her touch infinitely gentle. Kalen knelt beside the pallet, the gesture of a supplicant. He looked at the white-haired stranger, at the absolute surrender in her posture. A righteous wrath solidified in his soul, as hard and cold as the ice outside. He was the king. His word was law across the snow-swept continent. The first law, carved into the standing stones of his ancestors, was the protection of the vulnerable, an Omega and her pups. Someone had spat upon that law. Someone had tried to erase this life from the world. He reached out, his hand dwarfing her face, and placed his palm gently on her icy forehead. He brushed back a strand of hair white as bleached bone. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. But in that frozen tent with the wind screaming for entry, Alpha King Kalen made a vow to the silent moon and the dying fire. He would find the author of this crime, and he would deliver a judgment so absolute it would become a new legend of terror. As if sensing his oath, the smallest of the white pups, no bigger than his hand, let out a feeble mewl. Kalen, moving with instinct he didn't understand, carefully scooped it up. He cradled the icy little body against the bare skin of his own chest, inside his tunic, willing his own formidable life force into the fragile being. He sat there, a king turned nursemaid, a fortress against the cold, as Anya worked her miracles and 6 tiny heartbeats fought to keep their rhythm. Time in the shelter lost all meaning, measured only by the ragged breaths of the Omega and the weak stirrings of the pups. Kalen remained a statue of vigilance, a source of radiating heat and unyielding will. He had surrendered his outer layers, his royal insignia lying forgotten in a heap, to better serve as a living furnace for the two most fragile pups nestled against his skin. Anya moved between the others, administering warmed goat's milk from their supplies with a delicate dropper, her face a mask of concentrated hope. The scent in the tent was now a complex tapestry. The fierce sweat of the guards outside, the sharp herbs from Anya's kit, the primal, comforting power of an alpha, and beneath it all, that faint, sweet thread of milk and wildflowers that had called Kaelin from the storm. It was a scent that somehow soothed the very rage it had ignited. Hours bled into one another. Then, in the deepest part of the night, when the storm's fury seemed to pause for breath, she stirred. A faint tremor ran through her body. Her silver-white lashes, like frost on a window pane, fluttered. And then they opened. Kaelin, who had faced charging giants and treasonous Nords without a flinch, felt the world narrow to those 2 points of light. Her eyes were not a color found in normal wolves. They were the soft, haunting shade of lavender at dawn, pale and luminous, glowing with an otherworldly light in the lamplight. For a moment, they were clouded, lost in some distant frozen nightmare. Then they focused. They landed on him, on the massive shadowed figure of a warrior king kneeling beside her. Pure, undiluted terror flooded them. It was a look of absolute, soul-deep recognition of a predator. She shot upright with a gasp that tore at her raw throat, scrambling backwards on the pelts until her back hit the canvas wall. "No, please," she whimpered, her voice a rasp of broken glass. "No more, I beg you." Her wild lavender gaze darted, found the pile of pups now sleeping in a warm heap. "My children!" It was a mother's cry, a sound that bypassed all thought and went straight to the instinct to protect. She lunged forward, ignoring Kaelin completely, her skeletal arms trembling as she tried to gather all 6 pups at once, to pull them back into the fortress of her body. "They are safe." Kaelin's voice, when he finally spoke, was not the roar he used on the battlefield. It was low, deep, and measured, a rock in the torrent of her panic. She flinched violently, as if the words themselves were blows. She curled over the pups, making herself small, a final, pathetic shield. She looked at him then, truly looked. She saw a man carved from power, with shoulders that blocked the light, hair as black as a raven's wing, and eyes that held the burning intensity of a golden sun. They were eyes that commanded empires, and they were fixed on her. Who are you?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "Where is this?" "I am Kaelin," he said, keeping his hands open and visible on his knees, a gesture of peace from a creature of war. "I am under my protection. You are in the territory of the Frostfall Kingdom. You are safe." The word safe seemed to confuse her. She stared at him, her pale brows knitting together. "Safe?" she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllable. "Yes." He nodded toward Anya, who approached slowly, a wooden bowl of steaming broth in her hands. "You must drink," Anya's tone leaving no room for argument. "For your strength, for your milk." The Omega, Kaelin's mind refused to call her the Albino any longer, looked from the broth to the pups, then back to Kaelin's impossible face. The conflict in her lavender eyes was a storm of its own. Why? The single word was choked, saturated with a lifetime of suspicion. "Why would you help me?" The question was a dagger to Kaelin's heart. What world had she known where such a basic act of mercy was a puzzle? "It is a first law," he stated, his voice gaining the resonance of stone. "The king's law. The strong protect the weak. Pups and Omegas are the heart of the pack. They are sacred." Her head snapped up. The king?" "I am the Alpha King," he clarified, his golden eyes holding hers. Her face, already pale, went utterly bloodless. She wasn't just in an alpha's territory, she was in the presence of the king himself. A broken sound escaped her, and she dropped her head, baring the vulnerable line of her neck in the ultimate gesture of wolfen submission. It was an instinct beaten into her, a reflex of survival. No. The command was sharp, final. She froze. He softened his tone, though it remained an iron thread. Do not lower your head. Not to me. Not ever again. Then, to her utter astonishment, the Alpha King, the ruler of the North, slowly knelt on the packed earth of the shelter floor, putting himself physically beneath her gaze. The act was so profoundly shocking that her fear momentarily stalled. "My healer is Anya. My beta is Torin," he said, as if making introductions at a court feast. "We found you in the snow. You and your—" he looked at the 6 sleeping forms. "You and your children. They are warming. They are alive." The word alive broke her. A sob, harsh and ragged, tore from her chest. Tears not of ice, but of fire streamed from those lavender eyes, cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Alive!" she gasped, reaching out with shaking fingers to touch each pup, counting them in a hushed, reverent chant. 1, 2, 3, all 6. She collapsed forward, her forehead touching the furs, her body racked with silent, shuddering relief. Kalen did not move. He let the wave of safety, so new and terrifying to her, crash over them both. Finally, when her tears subsided into hiccuping breaths, he asked the question that had become the core of his being. "Omega," he said, the title gentle, "tell me your name." She looked up, her lavender eyes cleared by tears, holding a fragment of the person she was before the snow. "Ilara," she whispered, the name a secret finally surrendered. "My name is Ilara." Ilara hung in the warm, thick air of the shelter, a delicate bell after the storm's scream. Kalen tested it silently. It suited her, ethereal, ancient, belonging to myths and stars. "Ilara of what pack?" he asked, his voice still that low, careful rumble. The fragile peace in her eyes shattered. The terror rushed back in, colder and more familiar than the blizzard outside. Her breath hitched. I have no pack." It was a practiced lie, thin as the ice on an early winter puddle. Kalen's gaze did not waver. "You did," he stated, a judge pronouncing a fact. "A pack did this. A pack cast a nursing Omega and 6 newborn pups into the teeth of the great blizzard. That is not exile, Ilara. That is murder, slow, deliberate, and cruel." He leaned forward slightly, his golden eyes capturing hers, willing the truth to the surface. "Tell me who did this." Ilara trembled, her fingers twisting in the rough wool of the pelt. She looked at the pups, her touch lingering on the 3 with dark fur. "I cannot," she whispered, the words drenched in despair. "He will find us. He will finish it. He said he would hunt any trace of us to the ends of the earth." "He will not." The statement was absolute, a stone thrown into the pool of her fear. "No alpha in my kingdom holds a candle to my fury. Not one. Speak his name, and he ceases to be a threat." He saw the doubt, the ingrained, bone-deep fear of a tyrant's power. He needed a different key. He gestured to the pups. "They are of different ages," he observed, his tone shifting to one of calm deduction. "These 2, he pointed to the larger gray pups, are weeks older than the little white one." Her secret, held close even in her unconsciousness, was laid bare. She braced herself, waiting for the accusation, the rage. An Omega with stolen pups was an abomination. They are not all mine by birth," she confessed, the words a death sentence in her own ears. Kalen merely waited, his expression an impassive mask, offering no condemnation, only silent space for her story. 3 are mine," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength as she touched the 3 smallest, the white pup and the 2 black ones. Born in the dark, in the cold. I don't know how they lived. She took a shaky breath, her gaze moving to the 2 grays and the silver one. The others, they belonged to my sister, Sela, not by blood, but by soul. She was the only light in the dark wood pack. Kalen's blood, already cold, turned to glacier ice in his veins. Dark wood pack. Alpha Borak. A name synonymous with brutish ambition and casual cruelty, a thorn in the side of the kingdom's eastern border. Kalen had tolerated him for the sake of peace, a mistake he would now rectify. Continue, Kalen said, the word a soft growl of promise. Alpha Borak, Ilara whispered, the name itself tasting of ash. He sought a new mate, a political weapon from the Iron Fang pack. His current mate, Mycela, she had just gifted him 3 healthy pups, but one, Ilara's voice broke, one was born with a twisted foreleg, small. Borak called them defective, a stain on his mighty bloodline. He ordered them exposed. The ancient barbaric term hung in the air, left on a mountain ridge for the elements or predators to claim. Sela defied him. Ilara's lavender eyes flashed with a fierce, proud grief. She called him a monster. She tried to flee with her babies in the night. She swallowed a sob. He caught her. He made it a lesson for the whole pack. He ended her life before the Standing Stone. Kalen closed his eyes. A black, howling rage rose within him, a wolf of vengeance straining at its chain. He mastered it, for her. I was with child, Ilara continued, her story now a torrent she could not stop. When the pack was distracted by their celebration of his justice, I ran to the nursery. I took Sela's 3 pups, and I ran. I ran into the wailing wood as the first snows began. I had my own 3 in a hollow log, in a den of moss and despair. I tried to keep them all warm. I tried. She was reliving the horror, her eyes seeing not the tent, but the endless white. I foraged. I stole from trap lines, but the snow, it was a wall. The milk dried up. The hunger, it was a constant gnawing beast. I haven't eaten a real meal in... I lost count. I was just a shell, trying to be the last bit of warmth for them. I knew we were dying. I just wanted them not to be afraid at the end. Her voice faded to a whisper. She had not just been exiled. She had performed a desperate rescue, given birth in a frozen hell, and nurtured 6 souls with her own disintegrating body. She was not a victim. She was a warrior of love. Ilara, Kalen said, her name a vow on his lips. He reached out, not to her, but to the tiny white pup nestled against his chest. With a single, calloused finger, he stroked the soft head. The pup, in its sleep, nuzzled into the touch. And then it happened. A current, not of electricity, but of pure, resonant knowing, shot from the point of contact up his arm and slammed into the center of his being. It was a chord struck deep in the universe, a harmonic connection. It wasn't just the pup, it was her. His golden eyes snapped to Ilara's. She gasped, her hand flying to her own heart, her lavender eyes wide with shock and dawning, terrified recognition. The bond was faint, buried under mountains of trauma and starvation, but it was as real as the ground beneath them. It was the moon goddess's thread, the sacred, fated pull. This broken, magnificent albino Omega was her other half, his lunar queen, the one his soul had howled across a century of lonely rule. A dark, incredulous laugh echoed in his mind. Fate had a savage sense of poetry. Alpha Borak, Kalen said, and his voice was no longer that of a king holding court, but of a male claiming his own. You murdered your sister, you sentenced her pups to death, and you cast you and my children out to die. Ilara's eyes went impossibly wider at his words. My children. He rose to his full, towering height. The air in the shelter grew heavy, charged with a power that was both terrifying and sanctified. It was no longer just about justice. It was about reclamation. "You said you could not tell me," Kalen said. "You do not have to." He turned to the tent flap. "Torin." The beta appeared instantly, his face grim. "Alpha. Break camp for the Southern Ranger outpost. It is closer. We shelter there until the storm fully breaks. Then," Kalen's eyes glowed with an inner fire, "you will send our 2 fastest scouts, riding night and day to the borders of Darkwood. They will carry the King's seal and a single message for Alpha Borak." He looked from Torin to Alara, his heart a drum of war. "The message is this: the King is coming, and he knows everything." The journey to the ranger's cabin was a blur of white noise and profound warmth. Kalen had wrapped Alara and all 6 pups in his massive, fur-lined riding cloak, creating a cocoon against the world. He held them against his chest as he rode, his warhorse picking a sure-footed path through the drifts. For Alara, pressed against the solid wall of his body, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat, it was the first sensation of true safety she could remember. It was terrifying in its absoluteness. The cabin, when they reached it, was a small, sturdy fortress of stone and timber nestled against a cliff face. A fire was roaring in the hearth within minutes, casting dancing shadows on walls hung with simple tools and dried herbs. Alara was settled into a narrow bed piled with furs, the pups arranged in a basket lined with the softest wool the guards could spare. For 2 days, they existed in a bubble of healing silence. Healer Anya worked with quiet efficiency, mixing warmed goat's milk with nutrient-rich pastes from her healer's kit. The pups' weak mules grew stronger, more demanding. Color returned to their tiny noses and paw pads. Alara herself ate slowly, carefully, her shrunken stomach rebelling at first against broth, then stew, then simple bread. Strength, like a hesitant visitor, began to seep back into her bones. Kalen was a constant, quiet storm in the corner of the room. He spoke in low tones with Torin, plotting routes and mustering forces. He cleaned his armor with meticulous care, but his attention was a physical weight, always resting on her and the pups. His gentleness was what dismantled her last defenses. On the second night, she woke from a nightmare, not with a scream, but with a silent, suffocating gasp. She saw Sela's face, the shock in her eyes. She saw Borak's smiling cruelty. She bolted upright, trembling. Kalen was there before she could draw another breath, a dark silhouette beside the bed. "You are safe," he said, simply. He did not touch her, he merely stood as a bulwark between her and the shadows in her mind. "He did it because of me," she whispered into the dark, her voice raw. "Not just Sela, he wanted me gone too." "Why, Alara?" Kalen's voice was soft, inviting the secret she had held even from herself. She looked at the pups, at Finn, the little white one who now slept peacefully. "My children, they are yours. You feel it. They carry the alpha bloodline strongly." "Yes," she breathed, "that was the crime. I am an omega, an albino, a moon-touched, a defect, he called me. When he learned of my pregnancy, his rage shook the trees. He did not want my tainted blood mixed with his noble line. He had already chosen his new mate." "Rhiannon," Kalen supplied, his voice like grinding stones. "Alpha female of the Iron Fang pack. A brutal, politically brilliant match. My pregnancy and Sela's imperfect pups, we were an embarrassment, a hurdle to his new alliance." Alara met his gaze in the firelight, her lavender eyes clear and hard. "He told me to lose the baby, to take herbs and end it. I refused. That was my first sin. Sela, she defended me. She called him a coward and a poison. That was her death sentence." She took a shaking breath. "They didn't just cast me out, Kalen. His new mate, Rhiannon, she was the architect. The blizzard is the goddess's purifying breath," she said. "Let it cleanse this weakness from our future. They sent us out as a sacrifice, an offering to the storm." Kalen turned to the small, ice-webbed window. The storm had finally passed, leaving a sky of endless, star-dusted black. The moon, nearly full, cast a cold blue light on the snow. His silence was frightening than any roar. When he turned back, his golden eyes held the reflection of that icy moonlight. He used the goddess's name to sanction murder, Kaelin stated, each word dropping like a stone. He broke the oldest law. He broke my law. He crossed the small room and knelt by the bed, taking her small, chilled hands in his. They were completely enveloped. "Ilara," he said, and his voice was a vow that vibrated in the very logs of the cabin. "You are not a defect. You are not tainted. You are the woman my soul has howled for across 100 winters. You are my fated mate. You are my lunar queen." Her breath caught. The truth of it, the terrifying, magnificent truth, resonated in her own hollowed-out core. She felt it, the missing piece. Am I? Yes. He brought her hand to his lips, his kiss on her knuckles a seal of fealty. "And these pups are not an embarrassment. They are the royal line of Frostfall. They are my sons and daughters, all 6. He looked from her to the sleeping basket, his expression shifting to one of terrifying, loving possession. "My scouts are already riding. My army gathers at Frostfall. The sky is clear." He stood, his figure dominating the humble room. "Tomorrow we ride home, and then," his gaze locked with hers, promising annihilation, "I will give you more than my name or my title. I will give you justice. You told me who did this. Now I will end him. I will end them all." The journey to Frostfall Citadel was a passage from a nightmare into a dream. Kaelin traveled with a small, lethal guard, Ilara and the pups once more swaddled against him. The rest of the force, led by Torin, rode ahead like a thunderclap to rally the King's Legion. Frostfall was not just a city, it was a mountain reborn as a fortress, its spires clawing at the sky, its walls sheathed in ice and legend. Warmth radiated from within, a golden glow against the perpetual winter. For Ilara, it was overwhelming. She and the pups were installed in the royal wing, a suite of rooms with vaulted ceilings, roaring fireplaces, and windows that looked out over the entire snow-veiled kingdom. Healers and kindly, efficient nannies attended them. Soft silks replaced her rags, and food, exquisite and plentiful, appeared like magic. But Kaelin did not stay. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, a silent promise in his eyes, and departed with Torin, his mind already on the march to Darkwood. For 3 days, Ilara healed in a daze. She named the pups, the act feeling like a reclaiming of a future. Finn, the white one, for the fair snow. Sela, the boldest gray female, for her sister. Kaelin, the silver male, for his newfound father. The 2 black pups she named Rune and Shadow. The smaller gray female she called Wren. They grew stronger by the hour, their eyes opening. Finn's a surprising bright blue, the others in shades of gray and gold. On the 4th day, Torin came to her chambers. He bowed, lower than he ever had. "My Luna," he said, and the title sent a shock through her system. "The king has reached the borders of Darkwood. He has invoked the just Regis." Ilara's hand went to her throat. "The king's justice?" "The ancient challenge," Torin confirmed, his face grim. "A charge of high treason against the crown's law. Alpha Borak cannot refuse. The trial is not in a court, it is on the field of honor, and the king is the judge, jury, and executioner." Far away, in the dense, pine-choked territory of the Darkwood Pack, a celebration was underway. The blizzard had passed, and Alpha Borak was finalizing his mating ceremony with Rhiannon of Ironfang. The alliance would make him the undisputed power of the eastern forests. The great hall was thick with smoke, laughter, and the scent of roasting meat. Borak, a bear of a man with eyes like chips of flint, raised a horn of ale. To strength, to unity, to a new age for Darkwood. The massive oak doors of the hall exploded inwards, splintering off their hinges. The music died, the laughter choked into silence. Framed in the doorway, backlit by the cold afternoon light, stood Alpha King Kaelin. He was clad not in court finery, but in polished obsidian battle armor, the pelt of a legendary frost tiger across his shoulders. Behind him, flanking him in 2 silent, immovable ranks, were 50 warriors of the king's legion, their silver and sable armor seeming to drink the light. Kalen walked into the hall. The sound of his armored boots on the stone flagstones was the only sound in the world. He did not look at the stunned pack members. His burning golden gaze was fixed solely on the high table, on Borak and the sharp-featured red-haired woman beside him. "Borak," Kalen said. His voice was calm, conversational, and it carried to the farthest, darkest corner. Borak scrambled to his feet, his face cycling from shock to forced joviality. "Your Majesty, what an unlooked-for honor! Had we known of your visit, we would have prepared a feast worthy of—" "You would have hidden the evidence," Kalen interrupted, stopping 10 paces from the dais. The hall was a tomb. I do not understand, my king," Borak stammered, his hand drafting toward the axe at his belt. "Don't," Torn growled from Kalen's side, his own hand resting on his sword. "I am not here for feasts or flattery," Kalen stated. "I am here for a broken law. Alpha Borak of Darkwood, you are charged with the murder of the Omega Sela, the attempted murder of her 3 pups, and the attempted murder of the Omega Ilara and her 3 pups. A wave of confusion and murmuring swept the hall. Borak's face darkened with a mixture of fear and fury. "Your Majesty, you have been deceived. That albino wretch and her friend were unstable, cursed. They stole pups and fled into the storm. A tragedy, but their own doing." "Liar," Kalen whispered, and the word carried like a curse. "It is the truth," a new voice rang out, clear and cold. Rhiannon stood, her posture regal and defiant. "The moon-touched one was barren and mad. She poisoned Sela's mind against her own alpha. They chose their fate. They ran from Borak's righteous strength." Kalen looked at her with an expression of pure, icy contempt. "Barren, you say?" He raised his hand. "Torin." The beta turned and signaled. Through the broken doors walked healer Anya, and in her arms, swaddled in royal white furs edged with silver, was a pup. A healthy, bright-eyed pup with a coat of pure, dazzling white. Behind them, entering the hall with a grace that silenced the crowd, came Ilara. She wore a gown of deep twilight blue, the color of the Frostfall standard. Her silver-white hair was woven into a complex braid, a circlet of winterberries resting upon her brow. She was pale, still delicate, but her lavender eyes held no fear. They held the quiet, terrible authority of a queen. Borak saw her, and the blood drained from his face. He looked from her to the white pup, as if seeing vengeful spirits. "Barren, you say?" Kalen repeated softly. "She gave birth in the blizzard you sent her into. This is Finn, her son." He let the pause stretch, his gaze sweeping the horrified crowd. "My son." The word echoed in the dead silence of the great hall. "My son." The collective gasp was a physical thing. Pack members stared, their loyalties fracturing under the weight of the impossible scene before them. Their cast-out Omega, standing beside the king, holding the evidence of their alpha's lie in her very presence. Borak's face was a mask of crumbling arrogance. "A trick," he blustered, his voice too loud. "A changeling. That creature is not. It cannot be." "She is my fated mate," Kalen announced, his voice a rolling peal of thunder that brooked no disbelief. "The lunar queen, the one you sentenced to death." The final piece of the horror clicked into place for the Darkwood pack. Borak hadn't just exiled a troublesome Omega, he had attempted to murder the king's destined queen. It was treason of the highest order, a crime against the crown and the moon goddess herself. Borak's bravado shattered. He stumbled back, collapsing into his carved chair, then slid from it to his knees on the dais. "No, your Majesty, I didn't know. I swear on my life I was deceived, bewitched." His wild eyes swung not to Ilara, but to the woman beside him. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger, her, It was Rhiannon. She whispered in my ear. She said the albino's blood was a curse, that she would sow weakness, that the storm was a sign. I only acted for the strength of the pack. The air grew taut. Rhiannon, who had been watching Alara with unveiled hatred, now found every eye upon her. A sneer twisted her beautiful features. "You sniveling, spineless worm," she spat at Borak, her contempt dripping like poison. "You would blame me for your own cowardice?" She turned to Kaelin, her chin high. "He is weak, your majesty. A pack led by sentiment is a pack destined for slaughter. An albino omega, a lame pup? These are flaws, infections. I merely advised my mate to cut out the rot before it spread, for the good of all." "You advised him to murder Selah." Ilara's voice, quiet but crystal clear, cut through Rhiannon's rhetoric. "She was a sentimental fool," Rhiannon sneered, dismissing a life with a flick of her wrist. "She would have doomed her own get to a life of pity. And you, your venomous gaze locked on Alara, you were always a disruption, with your strange scent, making the warriors soft, distracting them from their duty. You were a sickness in the pack. I offered the cure." There it was, the confession, naked and ugly. Kaelin had heard enough. Rhiannon of Ironfang, for conspiracy to commit murder, for the murder of the Omega Selah, and for the attempted murder of 6 royal pups and the Luna Queen of Frostfall, you are hereby stripped of name and title. You are outcast. You will be taken to the bleak expanse, with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will face the wild alone. If you survive, you will never again set paw in any civilized territory. "You can't!" she shrieked, her composure vaporizing. She lunged, not at Kaelin, but to Ilara, claws extending. "My father will burn your borders to ash!" Torin was a blur of motion, the hilt of his sword connected with her temple with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Take her, now," Torin ordered, and 2 legionnaires dragged her limp form from the hall. Then Kaelin turned his molten gaze back to the cowering figure on the dais. "And you." "Mercy, my king, please," Borak growled, forehead pressed to the cold stone. "She provided the words," Kaelin said, each syllable falling like an axe blow. "But you held the power. You gave the order. You killed Selah. Your hands, your choice. You are a failed alpha, a failed protector, a failure as a wolf." Kaelin's hand went to the hilt of the great sword on his back. Borak shrieked, scrambling backwards. "The just Regis, it is a challenge, a fight. You must grant me the right to fight for my life." Kaelin paused, his expression unreadable. "A challenge, you are correct. The old law grants you that." A flicker of desperate hope lit in Borak's eyes. He was a formidable brawler. He might land a blow, earn a warrior's end. He staggered to his feet, drawing his own heavy axe. "I challenge you, Kaelin," he roared, a last vestige of defiance. Kaelin slowly, deliberately drew his sword. The ring of steel was the only sound. "I accept." It was not a duel. It was an execution. Borak charged with a bellow, axe raised high. Kaelin didn't move until the last second. He didn't use his blade. He stepped inside the wild swing and drove his armored fist into Borak's chest. The sound of splintering bone echoed through the hall. Borak flew backward, crashing through the remnants of the high table, landing in a heap of splinters and spilled ale. He writhed, gasping like a landed fish, his axe clattering away. Kaelin walked slowly to stand over him, the tip of his great sword resting on the stone by the alpha's head. "You wanted a challenge," Kaelin said, his voice low and terrible. "But you are not my equal. You are not worthy of a warrior's death by my blade." He turned to the silent, stunned pack. "This wolf is broken. He is stripped of his title, his rank, his name. He is Omega." The decree, enforced by Kaelin's overwhelming alpha power, settled on Borak like a physical weight, crushing the last of his spirit. "He will live. Kaelin declared. "He will live and he will work. He will perform the lowest tasks. He will clean the kennels, tend the graves, and answer to the one whose life he tried to erase." He pointed his sword at Ilara. "The Luna Queen is his alpha now. His life is hers to spend. She and the pups he sought to destroy will be her final judges when they come to age." He sheathed his sword and looked at Ilara, his eyes softening imperceptibly. "It is done." The return to Frostfall Citadel was a somber procession, a victory that tasted of ashes and settled scores. Ilara rode in silence, Finn asleep in a sling across her chest, the other pups in a covered sled pulled by sure-footed mountain goats. She was the triumphant queen returning to her fortress, yet the image of Borak's broken body, the echo of Rhiannon's hateful creed, played behind her eyes. Justice had been served, brutally and completely, but it did not fill the hollow space where Selah's laughter used to live. Callan, riding beside her, was a pillar of silent strength, but his thoughts were churning. Rhiannon's words were not the raving of a simple brute. "That scent of yours, a melody that lulls the strong to sleep, a subtle poison." It was too specific, too rooted in a dark understanding. It gnawed at him. Upon their arrival, the citadel erupted in relieved celebration, but Callan immediately summoned his most trusted advisors, Torin, healer Anya, and the ancient archivist, Orin, whose knowledge of lineage and lore was unsurpassed. For days, while Ilara was occupied with the pups and the overwhelming adjustment to royal life, Callan's inner council delved into the archives. They cross-referenced Rhiannon's Ironfang heritage with old bestiaries and forgotten genealogies. Anya conducted discreet, respectful examinations of Ilara, with her permission, comparing her physiology and unique scent markers to historical records. A week later, they requested a private audience in the King's Solar. Ilara was present, having just settled the pups for a nap. Orin entered, carrying a tome so ancient its pages seemed to be made of dried leaves and spider silk. His hands trembled, but his eyes blazed with the fervor of a scholar who has unearthed a world-changing truth. "Your Majesties," he began, his voice hushed with reverence, "we have been blind. We have categorized a miracle as a malady." He laid the book gently on the table, opening it to an illuminated page depicting a wolf of pure white with ethereal, star-like eyes. "The legends of the Lunastra, we believed them to be mere myths, tales of the moon goddess's favored children lost to the great wars. The star-moon wolves," Anya continued, her practical demeanor replaced with awe, "they were a bloodline of Omegas, born under specific celestial alignments. They were all marked as you are, Queen Ilara. Hair of spun moonlight, skin of the winter's first snow, eyes the color of the sky at the violet hour." "What was their purpose?" Callan asked, leaning forward, his golden eyes intent. "They were the ultimate harmonizers," Orin explained, tracing the elegant script on the page. "An alpha's power is a wildfire. It forges and defends, but unchecked, it consumes everything, including the pack it seeks to protect. The Lunastra possessed a unique empathetic gift. Their very essence, their presence, acted as a conduit. They could sense the emotional chaos of the pack, the seething rage of an alpha, the undercurrents of fear among the betas, and harmonize it. They did not suppress strength, they refined it. They turned discord into symphony, fractious ambition into united purpose. A pack with a Lunastra at its heart was said to be unconquerable, not just in battle, but in spirit. They healed divisions without a word being spoken." Ilara listened, a strange recognition settling in her bones. The way the fractious courtiers seemed to find common ground in her presence, the deep, settled calm that had replaced Callan's restless emptiness, the feeling she'd had in Darkwood Hall, not of power, but of a profound, focusing clarity. Rhiannon knew, she whispered. Yes, Callan said, the pieces slamming together. Iron Fang's lorekeepers preserve the darker histories, the records of wars where Lunastra were targeted first. They weren't seen as weak, they were seen as the ultimate weapon. A pack united by a Lunastra is a pack that cannot be broken from within by treachery or fear. Rhiannon didn't fear you as a defect, Alara. She feared you as the cornerstone of an empire. She knew if you bonded with an alpha, especially a king, your combined strength would be legendary, and your children— He looked toward the nursery door. Orin nodded gravely. The texts are clear. The offspring of an alpha and a Lunastra are blessed by both sun and moon. They are said to possess the ferocity of their sire and the profound unifying wisdom of their dam. They are natural leaders, healers of conflict, the ideal rulers for a lasting peace. Rhiannon didn't just want you dead. She wanted your bloodline erased from the world before it could begin. A cold, clarifying fury replaced the last of Callan's confusion. He had marched to avenge a crime. He had returned with a treasure beyond price. Alara was not just his mate, the answer to his soul's loneliness. She was the living, breathing answer to the centuries of strife that had plagued the Northern Territories. She was the key to a united kingdom, not won by the sword, but forged in the heart. Alara felt the weight of it settle upon her, not as a burden, but as a purpose. Her survival was not an accident. Her suffering was not meaningless. She had been preserved for this. She looked at Callan, her lavender eyes shining with a new, fierce light. She failed. She did, Callan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He took her hand, the connection between them humming with the truth of their destiny. The moon goddess had not merely led a king to his queen. She had led a fractured world to its healer. The albino outcast was and had always been the lunar queen, and her reign was just beginning. Peace in Frostfall was not merely the absence of war. Under the harmonizing presence of the Lunastra queen, it became a tangible force. Council meetings, once arenas of bluster and rivalry, transformed into sessions of focused strategy. Trade agreements were brokered with fairness. Border disputes dissolved into shared patrols. The 6 royal pups, Finn, Sela, Kaelin, Rune, Shadow, and Ren, grew not just in size, but in character, their unique personalities blossoming within the Citadel's strong, loving walls. Finn, thoughtful and observant, was often found at Orin's side, his nose in a scroll. Sela was a protector, herding her siblings with fierce devotion. The young Prince Kaelin displayed a tactical mind that impressed even Torin. Yet, in the quiet of the long winter nights, Kaelin's thoughts turned east. Rhiannon's ideology had not sprung from nothing. It was a weed that grew in specific soil. His network of scouts and informants, now bolstered by the loyalty of the reformed Darkwood pack, began to bring whispers from the far side of the bleak expanse. They spoke of a movement, a consolidation. A wolf who called himself Mordrin, an exile from a southern pack consumed by a wildfire, was preaching a new creed. He spoke of the sun's purifying fire, of burning away weakness. He called the moon's light pallid and passive, and those who revered it, especially those marked by its touch, were declared enemies of a coming, brutal dawn. His followers called themselves the Sun Eaters. Torin laid the latest report on the council table, his face grave. They are not raiders, they are missionaries of a sort. They move into remote valleys, isolate small packs, and offer a choice: either convert to the creed of the purifying sun, or be purged. They target the old, the sick, the differently marked, piebald coats, albinism. They call them moon scars. Their rhetoric is precise, Your Majesty. They don't just speak of strength. They speak of cleansing the softness that invites decay. They speak of the pale curse that weakens the Alpha's resolve. Ilara, sitting beside Kaelin, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frost on the windows. Rhiannon's hatred was personal, ambitious. This was something worse, an ideology systematized and spreading. "They're coming for us," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "Not just for me, for everything this citadel now stands for a kingdom where strength includes compassion." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "They see our unity as a weakness, our mercy as a flaw to be exploited." "Or eradicated," Torin added grimly. "Mordrin's numbers grow. He absorbs the ruthless and the fanatical. He promises them a world remade in fire, where only the pure strong survive." A council of war was called, but it was unlike any other in Frostfall's history. There were no boasts, no calls for preemptive invasion. The mood was solemn, resolved. Kaelin outlined their defenses, the impregnable citadel, the mustered allies, the stockpiled supplies. But a new question hung in the air, unspoken by the warriors, but felt by all. How does one fight an idea? How does an army built on loyalty and protective love defeat an enemy that believes love itself is a contaminant? Ilara listened, her gift quietly at work, smoothing the edges of fear, knitting their individual concerns into a shared resolve. Yet a private doubt took root in her own heart. Her Lunastra gift was one of peace, of calming the storm. But what if her people needed the storm? What if in the face of a fanatical fire, her soothing presence was a liability? Could a lullaby be heard over the roar of a blaze? Later, in their private chambers, she voiced her fear to Kaelin. "I am the heart of this pack, but in a battle, doesn't the heart need to be shielded? Doesn't the warrior need a different kind of fire? My scent, my presence, what if it dulls the edge they need to survive?" He turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "Ilara, you are not a sedative, you are a conductor. You took the chaos of my soul and gave it direction. You take the scattered fears of the pack and forge them into a single purpose. Mordrin's fire is wild. It will consume itself. Our strength, focused by you, will be like the sun through a lens. It will burn hotter and truer. They fight for hatred. We will fight for what we love, and there is no force on this earth stronger than that." His faith was a fortress, but the doubt lingered, a cold seed in the warmth of his certainty. The first true touch of the Sun-Eater threats came not as an army at the gates, but as a poison in the water. A trade caravan from a distant allied pack, the Silverstream, arrived at Frostfall in disarray. Their alpha, a sensible elder named Lyron, was feverish and babbling. Among his people were whispers of sun sickness. They told of encountering Sun-Eater emissaries on the trail, who shared food and spoke of a glorious new age. Those who partook later fell into a deep lethargy, their will sapped, speaking of strange dreams of a blinding sun that demanded surrender. Healer Anya worked tirelessly. The sickness was not physical, she concluded, but a kind of spiritual poisoning, a manipulation of the pack bond through tainted herbs and hypnotic suggestion. It was a weapon designed not to kill the body, but to capture the will. Alaura went to the healing halls. The scent of fear and confusion was thick, a discordant jangle to her senses. She moved among the sick, not speaking, just being. She let her Lunastra essence gently unfold. She didn't try to force calm. She envisioned it as a clear, cool light, washing over the psychic residue of the Sun-Eater's poison. To her amazement, she saw its effect. A thrashing young wolf stilled, his breathing deepening. A beta who muttered about the warm, welcoming light blinked, confusion replacing the vacant fanaticism in his eyes. She was not just soothing, she was cleansing. But the test was not over. As she worked, a sharp, acrid scent cut through the hall, a sun-eater sympathizer hidden among these Silver Stream refugees, revealed by his violent reaction to her presence. He screamed, clawing at his own face. "The pale silence! It burns! It drowns the glorious fire!" He lunged, not at her, but at a window, as if to escape her influence. Torin subdued him, but the message was clear. To Mordrin's followers, Alaura's gift was not just ineffective, it was actively agonizing. It was the antithesis of their chaotic, fervent energy. It was a weapon they had no defense against because it attacked the very frenzy that fueled them. This incident sparked a new, grim realization in the War Council. They will aim for her, Torin stated bluntly. Mordrin will know by now what she is. He will see her as his primary target, not to kill, perhaps, initially, but to capture or silence. Eliminating the Lunastra would be like plucking the keystone from our arch. Kaylin's expression turned to glacial stone. Then she becomes our greatest strategic point, not hidden away, but protected at the core of our strength. The battle for Frostfall will not be for its walls alone. It will be for its heart. A new defensive plan was forged. The Citadel's inner sanctum, the Moonstone Grove, a sacred walled garden within the mountain itself, was prepared as a final redoubt. But Alaura refused the idea of waiting in a gilded cage. "If my presence is a weapon, then I must be on the field," she argued, her lavender eyes blazing. "Not in the front line, but where I can be seen, where our wolves can draw strength from me, and where my silence can disrupt their fire." It was a daring, dangerous strategy. Kaylin hated it, but he saw the logic, and more importantly, he saw the steel in his queen. She was no longer the dying girl in the snow. She was a ruler, understanding the nature of her power and willing to wield it for her people. The following week, during a full training exercise of the combined Frostfall and allied forces in the Great Courtyard, Ilara put her theory to the test. She took her position on the central reviewing balcony, in clear view of the hundreds of wolves below. Kaylin gave the order for a simulated battle, a chaotic melee between two divisions. At first, her influence was as it always had been, a gentle, pervasive calm that threatened to soften the aggressive edge of the exercise. The warriors' snarls lacked conviction, their clashes were half-hearted. Ilara saw the problem immediately. She closed her eyes, reaching inward. She thought not of spreading peace, but of focusing will. She imagined the nervous energy of the young soldiers, the determined loyalty of the veterans, the protective fury of the fathers and mothers in the ranks. She gathered that swirling emotional current, and in her mind's eye, she channeled it, not away, but toward Kaylin, toward the banner of Frostfall, toward the shared home at their backs. The change on the field was dramatic and immediate. The half-hearted snarls coalesced into a unified, deep-throated roar. The movements of the warriors became sharper, more coordinated. There was no lessening of their power. There was a honing of it. They fought not as individuals, but as facets of a single, formidable organism. The enemy division found themselves overwhelmed not by greater frenzy, but by flawless, relentless synergy. Kaylin, standing on the field, felt it like a surge of lightning through his blood. His commands were executed almost before he finished giving them. He looked up at Ilara on the balcony, her white hair lifted by the cold wind, her face a portrait of intense concentration. She was not quelling the storm. She was directing the lightning. The exercise ended. A profound, energized silence fell over the courtyard, followed by a cheer that shook the mountain itself. They had felt it. They had understood. Their queen was not their comfort. She was their conduit. Their secret weapon was not hidden in an armory. She stood in the open. turning their collective heart into an unbreakable shield and a precise, devastating sword. The news of this would reach Mordrin, Kaelin knew. Let it. Let the Sun Eater know what awaited him. Not a weak kingdom softened by mercy, but a unified empire whose strength was multiplied by the love it protected. The stage was set. The shadow was lengthening. Frostfall, with its lunar queen at its focused heart, was ready. The demonstration in the courtyard changed everything. Where there had been abstract respect for the queen, now there was a visceral, battle-ready devotion. The wolves of Frostfall and its allies had not just seen their queen, they had felt her power reshape their own, turning a crowd into a legion. The news, as Kaelin predicted, did not stay within the mountain. It flew on the wind, carried by traders, refugees, and spies straight into the encampments of the Sun Eater host. In the war room, the reports shifted. Mordrin's advance, once a steady, consuming creep, slowed. His forces consolidated in the foothills of the Frostfall range, but they did not charge. They dug in. They built siege works, not of wood, but of dark, fire-hardened stone. Scouts reported strange rituals at dawn, silent, mass gatherings facing the rising sun, a palpable heat haze of fanaticism rising from their ranks. "He's hesitating," Torin observed, pointing to the map. "He's heard what she can do. He's not just planning to overwhelm walls, he's planning to break a spirit. He needs a strategy to counter her." Alara studied the scouts' sketches of the Sun Eater fortifications. They were brutal, angular, designed to funnel and crush. "He wants to provoke chaos," she said softly. "My gift works on harmony, on shared purpose. If he can shatter our unity, turn us against each other with fear or confusion, I become less effective. A conductor is useless if the orchestra is playing different songs." Kaelin nodded. "He will try to isolate us, cut communication, sow discord with lies or terror. The coming battle will be fought here." He tapped his temple, and here, he placed a fist over his heart, long before a single sword is crossed on the walls. This understanding shaped their final preparations. Codes were established for messengers. The chain of command was made redundantly clear, so every wolf knew their role, even if cut off. Stories of the kingdom's founding, of the law of protection, were told and retold in the barracks, reinforcing the why of their fight. Alara herself walked among the people, not just in the citadel, but in the outer villages that had been evacuated behind its walls. She listened to fears, held the hands of the elderly, laughed with children. She was not just preparing them, she was weaving them into the emotional tapestry she would need to conduct. During this time, she also sought out Barak, who had been brought from Darkwood to serve his sentence in the citadel's lowest kitchens. He was a gaunt, silent shadow, scrubbing pots until his hands were raw. She stood before him, Finn at her side, now a sturdy young wolf with intelligent blue eyes. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice not cruel but implacable. He slowly raised his head. His eyes, once full of arrogant fire, were dead, but when they landed on Finn, a spark of something, unbearable recognition perhaps, flickered. Here was the whelp he'd sentenced to death, alive and strong. "This is the future you tried to bury in the snow. Remember his face. When the battle comes, you will carry water to the healers. You will witness what the cost of the creed you followed was. You will witness what true strength looks like." She turned and left, not waiting for a response. Her judgment was not about his pain, it was about forcing his eyes open. The final night before the scouts reported the Sun Eater vanguard would be in sight, the citadel was preternaturally quiet, not with fear, but with a deep, focused stillness. In the Moonstone Grove, Alara stood alone under the shimmering geodes embedded in the cavern roof. She sought not guidance, but clarity. She reached out with her lunostrous senses, not towards the enemy, but inward, toward the beating heart of Frostfall. She felt the steady courage of the guards on the walls, the determined hustle of the healers, the protective fury of parents holding their children in the deep shelters, the unshakable loyalty of Kaelin in the command tower. It was a symphony of resolve. Her role was not to quiet it, but to ensure every note rang true together. Kaelin found her there. He didn't speak. He simply stood beside her, his presence the bedrock upon which her harmony was built. He took her hand, and in the quiet communion they shared a vision not of bloodshed, but of a dawn after, a kingdom still standing, still whole, their family safe. "They will come at first light," he murmured. "They worship the sun. They will want its rise to herald their victory." Alara squeezed his hand, her lavender eyes reflecting the cool light of the moonstones. "Then let us show them what rises in the dark, a strength that does not need their fire to see." The Sun-Eaters came with the sun, not a chaotic horde, but in grim, silent columns, their burnt orange and black banners hanging limp in the frozen dawn air. They filled the valley below Frostfall like a stain of rust and ash. At their head, upon a massive, shaggy beast of a horse, sat Mordrin. Even from a distance, he was a figure of imposing, ruined grandeur. His pelt was the color of a banked fire, crisscrossed with terrible, glossy scars. His eyes did not reflect the rising sun, they seemed to devour it. A single horn blast, raw and scorching, shattered the morning stillness. It was not a call to charge, it was a statement of presence. Then the silence returned, heavier than before, broken only by the creak of siege engines being wheeled forward. On the battlements of Frostfall, no one moved. Kaelin stood at the central parapet, Torn at his right, a line of commanders down the wall. Alara stood a few paces behind, not hidden but centered, a pillar of white in a forest of armored gray and black. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She opened her senses to the citadel. The tension was a high, tight string, thrumming. She began, gently, to tune it. Mordrin's first move was psychological. A group of Sun-Eater warriors dragged a line of bound figures into the open ground before the gates. They were captives from overrun villages, the old, the sick, a young mother clutching a piebald pup. A Sun-Eater captain, his voice amplified by the valley's acoustics, shouted up, "King of the pallid moon, behold the weak links you cherish. Their blood is the price of your heresy. Send out the moon-tainted queen, and these ones may yet serve the true sun in menial grace. Deny us, and watch your weakness be purged before your walls." A ripple of rage went through the Frostfall defenders. Kaelin's knuckles turned white on the stone. This was the play, to provoke a reckless, emotional charge, to break their discipline. Alara's eyes snapped open. She stepped forward, not to the edge, but to a place where her voice would carry. She did not shout. She spoke, and her voice, clear and resonant, seemed to be amplified by the mountain itself, carried on the very calm she projected. "Mordrin," she called. The name, spoken with such piercing clarity, silenced the murmur below. "You speak of purity, yet you threaten the helpless. You speak of strength, yet you hide behind chains. The sun you worship gives life to all, the strong tree and the fragile flower. You understand only its scorching. You have forgotten its warmth." Her words were not a rebuttal, they were a reframing. On the walls, the hot, reactive rage of the defenders cooled and hardened into something colder, sharper, a focused contempt. They saw the Sun-Eaters' actions not as terrifying, but pathetic, a confession of their own bankrupt ideology. Mordrin stirred for the first time. He lifted a hand. A Sun-Eater raised a blade over the young mother. "Now," Kaelin whispered, not taking his eyes from the scene. From hidden slits in the mountainside, Frostfall's elite archers, positioned for this exact moment, loosed. Their arrows were not aimed at the Sun Eater army, but with impossible precision. 3 arrows found the arms of the warriors holding the captives. A 4th severed the rope binding the group. It was a stunning display of skill, a message: we see, we can reach you, we choose precision over panic. As the captives scrambled, a squad of Frostfall's swiftest rangers, cloaked in white, erupted from a concealed sally port. They moved like ghosts, cut down the stunned guards, and swept the captives back into the safety of the Citadel's outer works, all before Mordred's main force could react. It was over in seconds. The roar that went up from Frostfall's walls was not a cry of bloodlust, it was a roar of triumph for a perfect moral strike. Their will had been tested, and through the focus provided by their queen, they had responded not with blind fury, but with flawless protective action. Mordred's scarred face contorted. His plan to break their spirit had backfired, solidifying it instead. He raised his fist and slammed it down. The siege horns blared again, this time in earnest. The battle for the walls began. Great stones flew, scaling ladders arced through the air. The Sun Eaters charged with their fanatical scream, a sound of chaotic, burning hate. The Frostfall defenders met them not with a matching scream, but with a deep, unison growl that seemed to rise from the stone of the mountain. Alara stood firm, a conduit. She felt the spike of fear as a ladder hooked near a young soldier, and she guided the protective instinct of the veteran next to him, guiding the older wolf's axe strike true. She felt a moment of confusion on the left flank as smoke billowed, and she focused the collective situational awareness of the unit, allowing their captain to redirect seamlessly. Her gift was a living network, balancing the emotional tide of the battle, ensuring panic didn't spread, ensuring courage was reinforced. The Sun Eater frenzy broke against a wall of disciplined, interconnected resolve. They fought hard, ferociously, but they fought as individuals against a single, mighty organism. Kalen was a whirlwind of destruction, but a precise one. He fought where the line was thinnest, his every move an extension of the kingdom's focused will. He could feel Alara's influence like a guiding star, keeping the chaos of battle from clouding his strategic mind. As the morning sun climbed, it did not herald a Sun Eater victory. It illuminated their frustration. Their numbers were greater, but they could not crack the harmonic defense of Frostfall. Mordred watched from his rise, his burning eyes fixed not on Kalen, but on the white figure on the wall who was the source of the unbreakable unity before him. He saw his error now. She was not a weakness to be targeted. She was the core of the strength he needed to shatter. With a final grating bellow, he signaled a retreat. The Sun Eater host disengaged, dragging their wounded, leading their dead beneath the walls. The first assault had ended. Frostfall had held, without a single breach. But as the defenders cheered, Alara swayed, a wave of exhaustion hitting her. Conducting the emotional symphony of 1,000 wolves through a battle had drained her. Kalen was at her side instantly. "He wasn't trying to win the wall today," Kalen said, grimly, supporting her. "He was testing you, learning how you work." Alara nodded, catching her breath. The true victory was theirs, but the war was far from over. Mordred had seen the source of Frostfall's strength, and a fanatic who has identified his enemy's greatest strength has only one goal: to find a way to break it. The battle of steel was done. The more dangerous battle, the battle for the heart of their harmony, had just begun.